There's a strange moment that happens when you check your bank account and realize an emergency would not just be inconvenient, it would be a full-blown event. Not a small problem, not an annoying surprise, an event, the kind that changes your whole week, sometimes your whole month, maybe longer. A tire blows out, the check engine light comes on, your rent goes up, your dog gets sick, your boss cuts your hours, your fridge dies on a Thursday night, and suddenly, life is no longer about plans. It's about damage control. That's how a lot of middle-class Americans live without even realizing how much it shapes them. You go to work. You pay your bills. You try to be responsible. You're not reckless. You're not lazy. You're not clueless. But under the surface, there's this constant low-grade financial tension, a kind of background static. You feel it in the grocery store. You feel it when your phone buzzes with a payment notification. You feel it when someone invites you on a trip, or when your car makes a weird sound, or when your company starts talking about organizational changes. And then people say things like, just save more, as if the issue is discipline. But for a lot of people, the deeper issue isn't just math. It's what money does to your nervous system. Because when you don't have much margin, your brain starts treating ordinary life like a threat. Every decision gets heavier. Every expense has emotional weight. Every mistake feels expensive before it even happens. And that's why your first $10,000 matters so much more than people think. Not because $10,000 makes you rich. It doesn't. Not because it solves every financial problem. It won't. But because somewhere around that point, for many ordinary working adults, money stops being only a survival tool and starts becoming a stabilizer. That's the hidden shift. Your first $10,000 doesn't just change your account. It changes your behavior, your stress level, your standards, your confidence, your decisions, your tolerance for bad jobs, bad deals, and bad timing. It changes the way you move through life. And once you understand that, you stop seeing savings as a boring financial chore. You start seeing it as psychological infrastructure. If this kind of money psychology content helps you think differently, subscribe. Because most people think the big financial breakthrough happens when they hit some giant number. 100,000, 500,000, 1 million. But life often starts changing much earlier than that. Sometimes it starts the first time you realize you can handle a problem without panicking. That's a completely different life. Before that first $10,000, a lot of people are technically functioning, but emotionally exposed. That exposure changes everything. It changes how you think at work. When money is tight, your job is not just your job. It's your oxygen supply. A bad boss feels more powerful. A toxic environment feels harder to leave. A delayed paycheck feels terrifying. You don't negotiate from confidence. You negotiate from need. It changes how you spend. When life feels stressful and fragile, spending becomes emotional, not always in big dramatic ways. Sometimes in small ways that feel harmless. Delivery because you're tired. A newer phone because yours still works, but it feels embarrassing. A nicer car because you want to feel like you're finally getting somewhere. Convenience purchases because your brain is already overloaded and just wants relief. It changes how you think. Scarcity has a way of shrinking your time horizon. You stop asking, what helps me a year from now? And start asking, what gets me through this week without falling apart? That's not stupidity. That's adaptation. When people live with thin financial margins, their thinking becomes more reactive, more short-term, more emotionally expensive. And that's why the first serious savings milestone matters so much. It gives your brain evidence that not everything is urgent. That may sound small. It's not. Imagine two people making the same salary, same city, same rent pressure, same grocery prices, same student loans, same inflation, same annoying little expenses that keep appearing out of nowhere. One has $700 in the bank after bills. The other has $10,000 saved. On paper, they may look similar, but psychologically, they are living in different worlds. The first person is one car repair away from chaos, one medical bill away from credit card debt, one bad month away from asking for help, borrowing money, or putting basic life on hold. The second person still has bills, still has stress, still has responsibilities, but their life has shock absorbers. That's the difference. The first person is living on a tightrope, the second person is standing on a floor, and when your life finally feels like it has a floor under it, your whole personality can change. You become less desperate, less easily cornered, less vulnerable to urgency. You stop making every decision with your back against the wall. That's what people miss when they treat savings as just a spreadsheet category. They think the value of money is only in what it can buy. But one of the most important things money buys is emotional distance. Distance from panic. Distance from bad decisions. Distance from people and systems that rely on your fear. Think about how differently you respond to everyday life when you have no cushion. The check engine light comes on, and now your brain is doing 20 things at once. Can I delay this? Can I afford this? What goes on the card? What if it's worse than I think? What if I miss work? What if this becomes one of those months? That's not just an auto problem anymore. It becomes a stress event. Now compare that to having $10,000. You still don't love the expense. You're still annoyed. But the problem stays a problem. It doesn't become a personal crisis. That is an enormous upgrade in quality of life. And it affects much more than emergencies. It affects your standards. A person with no cushion often ends up tolerating things they know are bad for them. Bad apartments, bad managers, bad deals, high-interest financing, friendships built around spending, a car payment that eats too much of their month. They tolerate it because the immediate cost of change feels too high. This is where the psychology gets deeper. When you don't have financial breathing room, you don't just lose options. You start losing the feeling that options even exist. You stop seeing alternative paths. You tell yourself, this is just how life is. This is what adults do. Everyone is stressed. Everyone has payments. Everyone feels behind. And to be fair, a lot of people do. But there's a huge difference between normal and harmless. Some money patterns are common because they are easy to fall into, not because they are good. That's why $10,000 matters. It interrupts the feeling of inevitability. It gives you proof that you are no longer completely trapped inside the month. Now, let's talk about the logic of it. $10,000 is not magical. The number itself is not sacred. In some cities, it won't even cover a few months of rent and basic living. In other situations, it's not enough for a major emergency. So this is not about pretending $10,000 is some perfect universal answer. It's about what that amount usually represents. For many people, your first $10,000 is the point where your savings starts becoming meaningful enough to protect your behavior. That's the key phrase. Protect your behavior. Because financial damage is not only caused by big expenses, it's also caused by the bad decisions people make when they feel cornered. When you don't have cash, a $1 in $200 car repair can turn into a high-interest credit, card balance that lingers for a year. A job you hate turns into 6 more months because you can't afford a gap. A medical bill turns into a payment plan, then more stress, then more reactive spending because stress makes self-control harder. A rent increase turns into desperation, which turns into a rushed decision, which turns into a worse apartment or a worse commute or more monthly strain. This is how money problems compound, not just because expenses exist, but because pressure distorts judgment. Now flip it. With $10,000 saved, some of those same problems become manageable. A $1 in $200 repair gets paid and life continues. Short job gap becomes survivable. A surprise bill becomes irritating instead of destabilizing. A move becomes possible. A negotiation becomes less scary. A bad offer becomes easier to reject. That's why the first $10,000 can change your life before it changes your lifestyle. You may still live in the same apartment, drive the same car, shop at the same grocery store, bring lunch to work, skip the luxury upgrades. From the outside, your life might not look that different, but internally, everything starts shifting. You walk into work differently when you know you're not one missed paycheck from panic. You talk to people differently when you're not carrying the same level of invisible fear. You make decisions with more patience. You become harder to manipulate with urgency. And that may be one of the most underrated forms of wealth in America, because a lot of modern middle-class life is built around monthly obligations. Car payments, rent, insurance, subscriptions, phone bills, debt payments, buy now, pay later plans, the upgraded couch, the financed mattress, the streaming services nobody cancels, the food delivery habit that feels small until it doesn't, the I deserve this purchases that become part of your baseline identity. When your life is built on recurring outflow, your savings is what protects your future self from becoming a hostage to your present choices. That's why a person earning more can still feel trapped. Income helps. Of course it does. But if every raise gets absorbed by more rent, more convenience, more upgrades, more fixed expenses, and more lifestyle expectations, then your life can look better while your actual freedom barely moves. This is where a lot of people get confused. They think the opposite of being broke is looking successful. It isn't. The opposite of being broke is having margin. Margin is what gives you time to think. Margin is what lets you say no. Margin is what keeps one mistake from becoming 5 more mistakes. Margin is what separates a stressful life from a fragile one. And your first $10,000 is often the first time that margin becomes real enough to feel. Think about how this shows up in normal life. Let's say your company starts hinting at layoffs. If you have almost nothing saved, that rumor lands in your body like danger. Your mind starts racing immediately. Rent, insurance, groceries, car payment. What happens if I'm next? But if you got $10,000, the emotion changes. You still care. You still prepare. But the fear doesn't own you in the same way. You have a buffer between the event and the collapse. Or imagine you want to leave, a job that is draining you. Maybe the culture is bad. Maybe your manager is impossible. Maybe the role looked good on paper but is quietly eating your confidence. If you have no savings, your options are mostly emotional fantasies. You can dream about leaving, but your bills keep pulling you back to reality. With $10,000, leaving is still serious, but now it's not fantasy. It's a decision. That difference matters. A lot of what people call confidence is actually backed by liquidity, not fake confidence. Real confidence. The kind that comes from knowing you can survive change. And this is where the identity shift happens. At first, saving money feels mechanical, restrictive, even a little boring. You skip things, delay purchases, transfer money into an account that seems to do nothing. But over time, that money starts changing you. You become more selective. You stop needing every purchase to make you feel better. You stop treating convenience like a reward for being tired. You stop assuming that every raise has to be visible. You stop financing proof that you're doing okay. You start caring less about appearing stable and more about becoming stable. That's a massive psychological shift. Because a lot of middle-class spending is not really about utility. It's about identity management, looking responsible, looking upgraded, looking like you've made progress, looking like you belong in the life you're trying to build. But once you've built real savings, you begin to feel something better than status. You feel calm, and calm is harder to sell, which is why so many people chase the shiny version of success instead. A nicer car is visible, a bigger apartment is visible, upgraded furniture is visible, a weekend trip on credit is visible. $10,000 quietly sitting in an account is invisible. But invisibility is part of its power. It doesn't perform. It protects. It doesn't impress people. It changes your decision-making. It doesn't make you look rich. It makes you less fragile. That's a better deal. Now, does $10,000 mean you've won? No. It doesn't solve under-earning. It doesn't erase debt. It doesn't fix housing costs. It doesn't guarantee peace in a country where the price of ordinary life keeps rising. But it often marks the point where you stop living entirely inside. Reaction. And that changes your trajectory, because once you experience even a little breathing room, you start seeing money differently. You stop asking, what can I buy? And start asking, what can I protect? What can I avoid? What can I walk away from? What kind of life gets easier if I lower my monthly pressure? Those are better questions, more adult questions, more strategic questions. That's when money stops being just consumption power and starts becoming decision power, and decision power is where real financial freedom begins, not at $1 million, not on a beach somewhere, not in some fantasy version of retirement that feels 100 years away. It begins the moment you create enough space between yourself and your next emergency that fear stops making every choice for you. That's why everything changes after your first $10,000, because it's not just a pile of money, it's the first wall between you and chaos. The first proof that you can build stability on purpose. The first sign that your future does not have to be dictated by every random bill, every bad month, every job threat, every emotional purchase, every urgent problem. It's the moment money starts doing what people quietly hope it will do all along. Not make them flashy, not make them superior, just make them feel a little safer, a little calmer, a little harder to trap. And for a lot of people, that feeling is the first real taste of freedom. So if you're chasing your first $10,000, don't think of it as some arbitrary personal finance milestone. Think of it as the point where life starts pushing you around a little less. Because the biggest change after your first $10,000 is not in your bank account. It's in your mind. And once that changes, your whole life starts to move differently.